Hello and welcome to my Ladder Fs Ryzeal guide. In this video I will show you some crazy combos, show you the decklist I use to get rank 2 on ladder with, as well as answer some frequently asked questions. So let's begin. First up we got the ice and truck combo. You can start with either ice or truck, you get to the same endboard, but play around different non-engines a bit better or worse. We will talk about that more in depth later. Let's assume we start with ice Ryzeal. Here we special X Ryzeal, and that's very important, because X Ryzeal can only search where we control level 4 or rank 4 monsters. That's why in this variant we especially summon X usually first. We're grabbing sword and next we're activating tract. This way we play around the Visual on our lorry better. Now that we have checked for this, we go into Doodruff on the 4th summon. And we are searching for Node and Ryzeal Cross, so that we have 2 more rank 4s which we can summon from our hand essentially. Next we are going into the Fiendsmith part of our engine. And we have a very common setup in this deck. In most of our Fiendsmith combos we are trying to get Lacrima and Engraver on the board at the same time, with Struct in the graveyard. This way we are able to use Struct in the graveyard to fuse into Fusion Lacrima. This will be important for a thing we are doing later. You will see that in a second why we are doing this. In this combo we have 1 extra body spare, so we are making a Necro Princess here. Next up, we are going into Sequencia. And with Sequencia we are fusing Rex Tremende. Many of you don't know what he does. Basically, he has multiple effects, but the 2 relevant effects are that while he is equipped with a Fiendsmith equip spell, he is unaffected by other card effects apart from Fiendsmith monsters. So he's like Liger Dancer basically. Also when he gets sent into the graveyard, he's able to add your Fiendsmith card from your graveyard or banishment to your hand. We're using this by making an Agnum Day. This way Rex Tremende triggers and grabs us the Engraver back to our hand. Next up we are summoning the Rex Tremende back in the field. And now we continue with our Ryzeal combo for now. We special sword, search for X, special X by sending down an aggregator. Next up we are activating Ryzeal Cross. Basically if we activate Ryzeal Cross, he would be forced to use Nibiru at this point at the latest. He was supposed to use it earlier already, but we always play around it anyway, but this is the very last point where he can ever activate Nip. So if he doesn't activate Nip at this point, this is the very last time where he could have tried to use it. Because otherwise he could just negate it. And here, since we don't know that he doesn't go for a Nip, we can make Granite first and send it later for Doodruff away. If you want to play it safer, you can also make Detonator first already. But we've used all our searches in our deck. We used Engraver as the last search to search for Fiendsmith in Paradise. This triggers Necro Princess to draw 1 card, and we can draw 1 more card in our Fiend Out deck with Ryzeal Cross. So let's see what did our 2-card combo end on. With the Towers monsters, this is really hard to out. We have a Detonator with an Aggregator detach. We have Necro Princess, which most likely will draw another card in our opponent's turn. We have Ryzeal Cross. We've drawn 2 cards in our Fiend Out deck. We search for Nibiru, the Primal Being. And we search for Fiendsmith in Paradise. Fiendsmith in Paradise on field is a board wipe. This graveyard effect allows us to send Fiendsmith Desiree down to the graveyard when our opponent special summons something. Send a card from the field to the graveyard later. So this endboard is completely crazy, and I've never lost a game where I set up this board. Not even blind second breaker decks can really beat it. Next up we have the most humble combo. It's just Ice Ryzeal with nothing else. Here we are special summon X again, so that you can search for sword. Now we're going into Fiendsmith. But since we don't have any Tract or Engraver, Hard Drawn, etc., we can only go for strong combos. So here we're making Lacrima, sending down Engraver, equip Requiem, and here we can decide if we want to special Engraver first or make Necro Equip first. If we want to play around cards like Bell or Meowth better, we make Necro Equip first. If we want to play around Bestial combinations better, we start with summoning Engraver. This is a choice you can make, it usually doesn't make a big difference. If you're playing against a blind second deck, for example, I would rather make Necro Equip first. If I play against a 50 crew card deck, which could very likely be branded, I would summon the Engraver before I make Necro Equip Princess. But yeah, then we are just making Wave Viking Caesar with those 2. And next up we continue the Ryzeal combo being protected with special sword, grab X, special X by sending Aggregator. And here we can play around the held Taylor or something better if you make Detonator first. But if you want to make a stronger board and draw 1 extra card, we go through Doodrive here. But technically you don't need to go through Doodrive if you don't want to. Here we're going for Node and Cross. And here we have the option to either send down the First of all, we draw and we keep the Sword Ryzeal in graveyard to play around the Bestial in the combination better. Here we can either send the Nord Ryzeal away to not discard a hand card, but we could also consider sending one hand card down to play around stuff better and have one more pop out of our detonator essentially. Here in this one card combo we got Ryzeal Cross, detonator with aggregator attached, away Viking Caesar, and in our opponent's turn we can set up a Paradise in graveyard. Because we have Lacrima and Requiem in the graveyard, we are able to summon Requiem with Lacrima, shuffle her back, use Requiem, summon the same Lacrima out of our deck again, and send Fiendsmith and Paradise down. The combo is still very strong, but this is the most humble and weakest combo which we basically have in our deck. Now let's talk about the Engraver plus X combination. I got asked about this quite a lot. The reason for that is that X Ryzeal is only able to search while we control only level 4 and rank 4 monsters. But at the same time, if we special summon a Ryzeal monster from our hand, we are getting locked into rank 4 from our deck. So how do we solve this problem? The answer is that we have to normal summon the X Ryzeal. That way we are able to search while still not being locked into rank 4s. And now the question becomes, do we start with normal X or do we start with the Fiendsmith part? Depending on with what we are starting, we are playing around different non-engine better or worse. For example, if our opponent has Dominus Impulse or Bestial in our hand, it's better for us to start with the Fiendsmith cards. Because we don't control any monsters or cards on the field, that way he cannot activate these cards from our Fiendsmith part. If our opponent however has something like a Maxi in his hand, then it's suddenly a bit more awkward, since we cannot normal X Ryzeal or special X Ryzeal and search, because we have a non-level 4 on our field. So this is a bit awkward, right? Also, if our opponent has Droll and Lockbird and we start with Engraver, we don't get any endboard on the field. So that's also something really annoying. However, if we start with normal X and we have like a Fuvalos in our hand, and we get hand trapped on our X and then we get Elsh on our Fiendsmith part, we also don't play. But if we would start with the Fiendsmith part and get hand trapped on it, get hand trapped on special summon X, we can still normal Fuva and full combo. So you always want to think what other cards you have in your hand and around what card you want to play around the most. If you are playing against a blind second deck, for example, which enters first, we would expect more from Mult Charmies and less of low impact hand traps, no Nibiru, that kind of stuff usually isn't there in those decks. If you're playing against a 52 card deck, I would assume it's probably something like Branded, and Branded plays something like this here, Saronir, so we would rather play around Bistils more. So depending on what other cards you have in hand and what you're expecting the meta or your opponent to have in his deck, you play the combo from a different starting point. This matters especially if you have something like Ash Blossom, Called By, or Fuvalos in your hand, right? Usually I would say if you have no normal summon in your hand and you have X and Engraver, I would normally have X first. Play around Maxi better. But if you want to play around Impulse, Bistils, etc. better, you start with Fiendsmith parts. If you have Tract and X, I would usually start with Tract, especially when I have Ash or Called By my hand, Maxi or Fuvalos better. But yeah, let's look at the combo. Let's assume you're starting with Engraver. It doesn't really matter too much because we get into the same endpoint very soon. And here it's important that you're sending down Fiendsmith and Paradise instead of Engraver. The reason for that is that we already used Engraver effect in the hand, so when we get into the extra Monday, we want to get back the Paradise so that we're able to search it to get it our import. It's the position we get to either way. And since we have a Sword Ryzeal in hand, we always play around Nip anyway. If you want to play really safe around Nip, you can make a do drive here again, and you still get to Detonator and Desiree on the field. But if you want to play it a bit greedier again, we can do our Fiendsmith setup again, where we activate Tract with Bauer on the field, Lacrima, summon back. With other Lacrima, this is important, because this way we are able to do 2 more rank 4s, since Ryzeal equals 1 rank 4 and Nord Ryzeal equals 1 rank 4. But if we don't have another level 4 on the field, we cannot make do drive. So you would not be able to make Gallant Granite and Detonator. This is the reason why we are making life with Lacrima and X tier. We are searching for Ryzeal Cross and Node, and next we go into the Fiendsmith part again, where we summon Rextra Monday. Here we are adding Fiendsmith and Paradise to our hand, and here we play the Ryzeal combo out. We special sword, we search for X, we special X, activate the field spell, and here we can decide again, do we have the card we want to pitch from our hand, or do we want to play a bit greedier. This is the wager you always have to do. You're searching for Nip again. Special note, pitch the Granite, and get Detonator again. We attach the Aggregator again, draw one, and still have a very strong combo. We equip the sequence. This combo we still get Paradise, Detonator, Field Spell, draw one, and a Rex Drum set up, which is still very strong, and we search for Nip. Now that we've seen the most important combos, let's talk about the deck list. Let's begin with the Ryzeal cards. I decided to run a quite large Ryzeal package, because I really want to see a Ryzeal card in my starting hand, and I do include a note in cross, so that my Ryzeal cards achieve a bit more and setup is way stronger and board in comparison. I did decide to not play Star Ryzeal in this deck, because people hand trap me as if I would play the card regardless. Therefore they throw Imperms, Ash Blossom, etc. on my very first Ryzeal summon. Therefore I don't really need Star Ryzeal. If people however would change their playstyle against Ryzeal, you could consider playing Star Ryzeal again in the deck. At the moment I don't think it's needed. Talk about the Fiendsmith card. I decided to run the most amount of copies possible from Engraver and X-rise, because they are very strong one card combo, and they are one of the best extenders in my deck, therefore I max out on it. I decided to only run one copy of Lacrima instead of two, because I already run a lot of normal summons. However, you could consider cutting one copy of Sword Ryzeal to add one more Lacrima to your deck. I decided against Fiendsmith Sanct, because I don't really like the combos with the card and it plays a bit bad into some of the hand interactions in the game. Therefore I don't like it too much. Let's talk about non-engine. The first thing you're probably seeing is I'm only playing Call by the Grave and not Crossout Designator. Why is that the case? I do believe that Crossout Designator is pretty bad going second, and the main reason you are playing Crossout to begin with is to stop cards like Maxi, etc. Call by in comparison is quite a bit better going second, because it can hit some interactions from the opponent's graveyard, which sometimes comes up, making it way more reasonable going second. But if you're looking, okay, what are the most important cards to hit with Crossout? It's usually Maxi and some other choke point and traps. But my deck in the 2-card combination can play around all the low impact hand traps like Ash Blossom, Imperm, Nibiru, etc. And the Ryzeal cards are already very good into Fuvalos, so I don't really mind too much if I get hit by a Fuvalos. In my Ryzeal Fiendsmith cards, worst case set up one interrupt for one draw under Fuva, so that is not a big issue. So the only real reason why I would be playing Crossout is to stop Maxi. But Maxi is at 2 and not at 3 anymore. So the math of it changed a little bit. So for example, if we look, do I play under Maxi? We would see that with 5 outs in the deck, I play under Maxi 12% of my games roughly. It's a bit less, but roughly 12%. If I would add Crossout into my deck, the games I play under Maxi would change from 12% to just 10% going first. So the difference is just 2% of my going first games I play less under Maxi. However, the games I play under Maxi I don't instantly lose, so very often I still win under Maxi, because I set up a Detonator in like 2 to 3 draws with an Aggregator detach, and I still have some hand traps. Especially cards like Nibiru really help me under Maxi. So the card doesn't hit me hard enough for me to put in a really bad going second card in Crossout Designator in. That is why I decided against the card. However, if cards like Bestials, Nibiru, etc. also became way more popular, then you could consider adding the Crossout back in. It's not a terrible card, but it's a solid card for going first, but I don't think it's needed in this deck. I prefer playing one copy of Talents instead, because Talents going second can sometimes be good, not against every deck, but against like Ryzeal for example, it can be quite good. Next up we see that I play 3 Nibirus, which is also pretty uncommon in Master Duel. I think Nibiru is one of the strongest hand traps paired, and against a lot of matchups I win going second if I pair Nibiru with one of the other hand traps. For example, if I play against Malice, I need to throw a card like Lancea or Fuvalos at them and pair it up with a Nibiru, because just Lancea against Malice is not enough if they have backup at Ignister. If you have Nibiru and Lancea, you always win against Malice. But with just Lancea Imperm, you're not guaranteed to win, So I built my deck around Nibiru as my prime hand trap, quote unquote. So I want to draw a card like Fuvalos, Nibiru, and pair it up with something else to win. And usually you would say Fuvalos and Nibiru are not the best pairing, but against a lot of the decks, especially Malice, this combination of cards can actually be quite good. So that is why I decided to run 3 Nibirus. However, if the meta changes, or you want to play a different game plan against the decks going second, you could consider swapping up the non-engine. I just decided to build my deck around Nibiru as non-engine. Next up, you will probably ask, why are you playing one copy of Effect Veiler, you're not even playing it as a crossout target, etc. The reason for that is, I checked like the math on Nibiru pairings, etc. and I wanted to have slightly more pairings with Nibiru. This way I have a higher chance of drawing a good combination of cards against the meta decks. Meta changes a bit, you might want to swap these cards out a little bit. But in the meta I played this was a solid pairing. You could consider playing more Veilers, for example, and cut the talents, etc. But this is what I liked. Talk a bit about the extra deck. One thing many people are asking me about is one detonator enough in this deck? And I would say yes. The amount of times the second detonator would come up is very limited. But if I could play like 17 to 18 cards in my extra deck, the second detonator would probably come in at that point. I did play 2 detonators in the beginning, but I cut the second detonator and added in SP Little Knight. SP came up way more often for me. Most of the times where the second detonator would come up is if my first detonator gets banished by SP Little Knight from a Malice deck and I can't shuffle it back. But even in those games I often win because I get to do another turn, so they didn't combo. Another card people ask me about is Rex Tremende. Is he needed? And I would say he is definitely needed in this deck. If you don't have Rex Tremende in your deck, your combos become a lot worse, your grind game becomes a lot worse, and I would cut like 5 other cards in my extra deck before I would consider cutting Rex. I think this card is very underappreciated and really broken. Let's answer some frequently asked questions. Why do I play Fiendsmith Ryzeal over the other variants, and do I think it's better than the rest? One thing I must say is that in Master Duel, the difference in between the Ryzeal variants isn't as big. So if you play one Ryzeal variant, it's not that much better than the rest. I would say that Pure Ryzeal and Heraldic Ryzeal are a bit behind the rest. Pure Ryzeal used to be pretty good, however the Baguska ban did really hit the deck quite a bit. The strongest endboard of Pure Ryzeal included Plasma Hole, exceeding into Baguska in your opponent's turn. This isn't a thing anymore, so the board got quite a bit weaker. Heraldic, in my opinion, is also slightly behind the rest, because the deck plays less non-engine compared to other decks, and it also plays quite a lot of bricks. I really don't like the deck too much. However, the deck is not that bad or something, I just think it's slightly worse than the other versions. Fiendsmith Ryzeal and Magistus are both very strong decks, with similar strengths and weaknesses. And you can make points for either of them. For example, the Fiendsmith cards help you with some of the glaring issues, quote unquote, which Ryzeal has. For example, if your opponent has a big Nibiru token, and you have a Nibiru on your board, in regular Ryzeal variants it's quite annoying to deal with tokens, because you need to make one rank 4 just to remove it, otherwise it's already hard to deal with. Also, Nibiru on your field, for example, is quite a bit worse in comparison to Fiendsmith, because it stops you from comboing more than anything. Whereas in Fiendsmith Ryzeal, Nibiru on your board helps you at pushing through hand traps, funnily enough. So these are some advantages of the Fiendsmith deck. However, the advantage of the Magisto variant is that you have more flex spots in your extra deck, or something like Tornado Dragon or something if you want to. Also, you are able to play 7th Tachyon to get more high quality starters and extenders in your deck. So there are points for both of the decks. I think they are both on a very similar level and both are very powerful. Why do I set Tract in Bonfire before activating it? Assume you're playing Master Duel and you're toggled on. And you have a Maxi in your hand. The opponent sets a card, and then the game asks you, do you wish to activate Maxi or not? And this is the reason why I set the Tract first, because sometimes I see a reaction window. And if I know my opponent can react to me setting a card, there's only a limited amount of cards he can activate to it. So I get some free information, quote unquote, which is a very relevant thing in Master Duel, to track reaction windows to understand what cards your opponent can have in hand. Another thing why I do it is that there's a low chance that my opponent uses Lancia on the resolution of setting the card. Because if you're playing Malice and you set a card like MTP or TB11, if for some reason you're playing TB11, and then normal summon a Dormouse, for example, your opponent plays Lancia and you can chain the trap. This way you can play around a little bit, quote unquote. And this is a fear some people have when you set a card. So this could also be a very nice thing happening, especially if you have a talents in hand or something like this. The next question is, can the deck compete in the new Mitsu era, quote unquote? Yes, it definitely can compete with Mitsu Ryzeal and some of the other decks. Thing which might change, however, is the non-engine a little bit. Stuff like Bestials, for example, become a lot better. And in my opinion, you might want to increase the amount of Lancias to 3. Because funnily enough, Malice becomes even better after its nerfs and after the release of the Mitsu cards. The reason for that is that Mitsu cards, they add more bricks into the deck, and if you hit a choke point, for example, Mitsu Ritual with a Dominus Impulse or Sargi with an Ash Blossom, there's a high chance that they pass to your hand traps instead of setting up a half board. And this really helps decks like Blue Eyes and Malice to be way more competitive now. Also, Orcus is a new meta deck which joined the meta, and it's also affected by Lancia quite a bit. So the chance of Lancia being a good card in your hand goes up quite a bit in my opinion. Why did I only hit rank 2 and not rank 1 with the deck if the deck is so good? Skill issue. However, Grey Ghost, one of our fantastic partners for Worlds, got rank 1 with the deck, so it is pretty good. It's just me that I only got rank 2. Why did I play pure Ryzeal Worlds over Fiendsmith Ryzeal? There are two important reasons for that. One is the shared card pool format. This means if I put the Fiendsmith cards in my Ryzeal deck, no other deck gets the Fiendsmith cards. And what I did in Worlds was I was playing a pure Ryzeal deck, which tried to have roughly a 50% win rate in the mirror match and against Malice. In the third deck, which was quote unquote the dog deck or the worst deck of the bunch, which used to be like Memento, Branded or something, I tried to counter with my Snake Eyes deck, which had Retaliating Sea in it. So if I was queuing into something like Branded, or a Memento deck which was built with Ultimate Slayer and stuff like this to beat a Ryzeal deck very, very well, I was able to get some more win percentage out of my Snake Eye deck. This was like the idea I had. And if I were to play Fiendsmith Ryzeal, I needed like an idea for my secondary deck. But I didn't really have something in my mind which was very crazy for it. Also, there was one big upside of pure Ryzeal for the event. First of all, you could basically choose what endbot you're going for. You were way more flexible. And you knew what your opponent was playing and what non-engine they roughly have. Because you were able to see what they played during the patches prior, right? So if I play against a Ryzeal deck or like a Memento deck, I'm able to make like a Baguska and protect with a Star Leech. And it's really hard to out. If I play against a Malice deck, I can set up the Plasma Hole and go for a Detonator and that kind of stuff. This way you were able to play around the non-engine much better, right? Also, the matchups you had at Worlds were a bit different. You were playing against one Malice deck, one Ryzeal deck, etc., right? Fiendsmith Ryzeal has a good matchup against pure Ryzeal, but against Malice it's on a similar level to Ryzeal or it's slightly behind, depending on what non-engine Malice plays. And if I had the bad luck that some Malice player would have played a Bestial heavy deck, then my Fiendsmith Ryzeal deck would have a bad win rate against that player. And we wanted to avoid that because we didn't know if someone actually would do that or not. That's why pure Ryzeal was quote unquote the safe choice. That's why I took the deck. Not because it's better. We believe that Fiendsmith Ryzeal was better, but it had more risk attached to it. But yeah, thanks for listening to my guide and we see each other in the next video. Bye.